So now that we have talked about what blood does and what's in blood, we need to look at specific things that are in the blood. And that's, of course, the cells. So let's start with erythrocytes. These are red blood cells. And red blood cells, if you remember, they're born in the bone marrow, right? Hematopoietic stem cells will differentiate into the erythrocyte or the pre-erythrocyte, and we get these red blood cells. They look different than regular cells because once they enter the bloodstream, they enter the bloodstream as reticulocytes, by the way. And this is just after they have kicked out their nucleus. So they're immature as reticulocytes, and then in about 48 hours, then they become actual working red blood cells. So red blood cells look weird. They're biconcave. So from the side, they look kind of like that, and from above, they look kind of like a donut, but they don't go all the way through in the middle. So they last about 120 days once there. We know that they don't divide and increase their numbers that way because they don't have a nucleus. So we know too that all blood cells come from the bone marrow. They do not increase their number through mitosis. So red blood cells are basically just little bags of proteins that are made to carry oxygen. That's all they do. That's their function, and that is pretty much all they do. So one red blood cell contains about 250 million hemoglobin molecules. And if you remember, hemoglobin is a quaternary protein, if we remember that correctly. And it's 4 tertiary proteins that are linked together kind of like this, right? And in the middle of these little guys, these little proteins, is a little structure here called a heme. And the heme molecule contains iron. Iron loves oxygen. So oxygen binds, it binds to these heme molecules, just sticks to them like glue. Okay, so one hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules. So within a red blood cell, since we have 250 million hemoglobin molecules, one red blood cell can carry 1 billion oxygen molecules. That's just one red blood cell. And think about all the red blood cells that you have. Okay. So the function of a red blood cell is to travel into the lungs, pick up oxygen, and then take them to the tissues. So it's a pretty important function. And when it goes to the lungs, it will pick up oxygen until it is saturated with oxygen so that it can go back to the tissues and then deliver oxygen to tissues that obviously will need it. So in the blood, we have a certain number of red blood cells, and that can be measured, and that is called the hematocrit. So that is the percent of the blood that is actually red blood cells. It's your hematocrit. And anemia is a disease in where the number of red blood cells is deficient, or hemoglobin is deficient. So it's a deficiency in the ability of those cells to be able to carry oxygen. Okay, so it's a decrease in the number of red blood cells, or can be deficient hemoglobin. So different things can cause anemias, renal failure. If you're having problems with your kidneys, then kidneys may not be able to make sufficient EPO. So erythropoietin, that's the hormone required to stimulate blood cell production. Could be a bone marrow problem. You could be not enough B12 in the diet, or folate, or something like that. That will affect the ability for the stages of hematopoiesis or erythropoiesis to occur. Obviously, hemorrhaging, things like that can cause an anemia as well. So that's pretty much it with red blood cells. That's all they do. Remember, when they're being born in the bone marrow, most of the time they spend in those stages is making protein, so making hemoglobin. Okay, and then once that's done, well, all that's left in that red blood cell when it goes into the system is its hemoglobin, and then it has the ability to make energy in order to do its thing. It has the ability to make energy anaerobically, okay, through glycolysis. It does not use the oxygen that it has, doesn't waste it to make energy for itself using aerobic metabolism. Okay, so it's always anaerobic there. Once the cell is about 120 days old, it gets broken down. It gets broken down in either the spleen or the liver. So either one can do it. It's usually the spleen. The components of it are recycled. And what can't be recycled then is excreted from the body in the feces. So that's the main thing with red blood cells. And the next video we'll talk about white blood cells.